Newsfirst Newsline.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline, of course, coming to you as always, live and direct from our Newsfirst studios here in Colombo. Well, to discuss the current political situation in our country, which is of course always almost at a very volatile state, we've got political commentator Malinda Seneviratne, no stranger to the network. A very good evening, Malinda, and welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Malinda, we always, of course, get you down to speak of the political situation in the country, of course. As far as the social status in the country goes, we have an issue with an import of substandard coconut oil into the country. We have environmental destruction that is rampant. All these things, while these things are in the discussion, we must, of course, not forget that Sri Lanka suffered a huge defeat at the Geneva Human Rights Council as far as Sri Lanka's human rights record goes. Now, however much the cabinet of ministers, certain members of the cabinet tried to portray this as a certain victory, playing some mathematical games to a certain degree, of course the general public really understood what happened here.
Well, if it is a huge defeat, I disagree with the terminology, because it was defeat was
as far as the vote goes. As far as the vote
it was inevitable. I mean, you have a situation where some rogue nations with guns and bucks hold sway over the membership. They bring a proposal, and then you have a vote, and then you get some numbers and you say, oh my God, Sri Lanka has suffered a huge defeat. That is one way of interpreting it. I think it was inevitable given the current dynamics of the global political economy. Now, even the Tamilnet was saying that this is not the resolution was not to their liking because it didn't talk of genocide. They were talking mostly about
the current incidents.
Yeah, possible violations.
Of
but if you're talking about possible violations, just the other day there was a report about 6,000 cases of racial abuse in schools only in the last year in Britain. Possible violations, come on. We've known about, I can't breathe, possible violations, United States of America. These are the countries that are pushing. They have plundered, raped countries, and possible violations in Britain. Sharlan, now, don't forget that they just passed a bill to protect forces abroad. So tomorrow, if they invade some country, tomorrow if they go rape, plunder, torture, kill, destroy, send countries back into the Middle Ages, they have a bill to protect them. So possible violations, if that is the issue, they should throw that back at Britain and all the countries that support it. But we lost. We lost, right? Not a surprising kind of decision. Of course, the government will play with the numbers and say this is the percentage of the population and so on. That is like dukata kiyana katha. But whether we could have done this any better is something that we should look, and why we got into this situation. Various governments, from the Rajapaksas to the Sirisenas and the Vikramasinghas, and especially Mangala Samarasinghe through Resolution 30, by co-sponsoring Resolution 30/1. So if you forget all that history and just talk about this something that happened in Geneva a couple of weeks ago, where that's one way of looking at it, but that's not giving us the whole picture of the political economy of these things.
Well, some people might call the defeat in Geneva old news because it's a couple of weeks old, but unfortunately the effects of it will continue to run.
Yes, exactly, because it's a yearly thing. We are it's going to be taken up a few years from now, and every
next year.
59, I can't remember the exact for kind of this particular issue.
The resolution.
And this is a circus of vexatious persecution. I like to use that term, which comes around every year around this time. So it's not going away.
And we don't really have to wait a couple of years, because we are about to hold the provincial council elections. It has not officially been announced, but at least the president, there were reports that the president has asked members of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna to prepare for the provincial council elections, and this too was a focus of the issues that were brought up at
It's what India had wanted.
And that was seen as one of the main reasons why India actually abstained from voting.
Well, India has it seems to be geographically confused, because India doesn't know whether it is in the Atlantic Ocean or in Asia. India has chosen to stand with Europe and North America in a boat where the rest of the world, by and large, went against that resolution. But India has its own issues about Tamil Nadu elections and so on. India plays that. I mean, they have their interests, but India keeps harping on the 13th Amendment, which is a result of the Lanka Accord, which was forced on Sri Lanka, and to which we of course signed by a weak and maybe spineless government back in the day. But India didn't deliver on its side of the bargain, didn't disarm the LTT. India had certain strategic and economic interests which they scripted into an agreement which was about the Tamil people. It has nothing to do with Tamil people. So right now they are thinking about the Quad. That is their interest, but they can't openly go against the Quad, Quad countries, so Japan, Australia, and especially the United States. So it has to say something. But they brought up the 13th Amendment, and the 13th Amendment, as you mentioned, it is part of the Constitution, and we are talking about provincial council election. Now let's talk about that. First, we are in the process of amending or bringing in a new constitution. There's a process going on. Elections have been postponed, and that's not a good thing, and a case can be made for holding the provincial council elections because it's part of the constitution, and regardless of the constitution amending or reforming, ongoing process. My issue is, why don't you finish that? I mean, how many years does it take to come up with a draft new constitution? Do that, and let's see where that leaves us with the 13th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment, India has wanted it implemented. Malinda Rajapaksa, when he was president, spoke about 13 plus. Provincial councils haven't been functioning. I mean, we haven't had elections for more than 3-4 years in some cases. But administration goes on, which makes the case for decentralization rather than devolution. Even the ardent supporters of devolution have not even uttered a whimper of protest about elections not being held over the so many years.
You're referring to the Tamil National Alliance, are you?
Tamil National Alliance is not the only group of people who are for devolution. There are all kinds of so-called human rights people, Center for Policy Alternatives, National Peace Council, United Nations, various rapporteurs and various people have talked about this. But they didn't, about democracy and human rights, but they are not talking about the fact that the previous government did not hold elections. This government can say we are in the process of holding, reforming the constitution. But then, as you said, if the Sri Lanka Posijana Peramuna rank and file have been asked to prepare, then that's kind of saying we are for the 13th Amendment, or they have to clarify that and say, well, it's part of the constitution, so for that reason we have. But the real thing is that all political parties, they love elections, right? Elections are a time for the government. It's a endorsement or to check in the kind of sentiments of the voting public in terms of its track record. For the opposition, it's which is in disarray, it's a chance to stabilize itself, it's an opportunity to speak about the issues of the country to a large number of people on the ground. So political parties like it, like these elections, and of course we have a system where you graduate from the local government to the provincial councils and then to parliament, cabinet and to president. So career paths are at stake here. Maybe that is the reason, but only those who are in it will know. We are just ordinary citizens who are out of the process. We get to vote or choose not to vote.
Malinda, it's important that governments have their policies right, and of course Sri Lanka has been known for not having straight policies, at least in the recent past. We saw, when speaking about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, we saw during the presidency of Malinda Rajapaksa, he promised India of 13 plus, which means even more powers devolved into these provincial councils and institutions. Now, since the government is currently, of course, under the premiership of Malinda Rajapaksa, and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Malinda Rajapaksa share similar policy views for the country, was this a statement of policy? Was this just a statement to console India as far as the obligations under the 13th Amendment?
Of course, the utterers of the statements have to answer that question, but I would like to elaborate a little bit about the 13 plus, the way you interpret it. I don't know what Mahinda Rajapaksa, when he was president, had in mind when he said 13 plus, or what kinds of pressure was brought upon him to say that. That was a very tense moment in our history. We were about to defeat the LTT leadership, and India was about to have the parliamentary general elections. So there was probably pressure brought upon him from various parties. But there's a way, I think, where devolution can work. Devolution of power. Now we are looking at provinces where the boundaries have been arbitrarily drawn. Arbitrary. By who knows who, right? Under what kind of delusion were these lines drawn? For administrative purposes. Now on those lines you superimpose a map and say these are traditional homelands, there's a problem, I have a problem there, right? Where is the history that supports these lines? Provincial boundaries or any boundaries are typically, they go along natural boundaries like mountains or rivers or seas, if that is the case. So those are, but if you want a redemarcation of these boundaries, make it scientific, make it, rationalize it, where every province, you don't have to have 9, you can have 5, you can have 3. You rationalize it so that every province except the central province, or you can also cut it if you want, has a shoreline, right? So there's some rationality to the business of power devolution. But then look at the problem of the distribution. Now you have 75% of the national income, it's the western province that contributes to the GDP, right? Now you and I are right now in the western province. We agitate and say what we earn we keep. What we earn we keep. What happens, right? Now if we went very strongly on the whole business of devolution, what would we have done with COVID? What do we do with rivers? Where do rivers stop? Right? So there are issues. India is supposed to be a federal government. So there is the central government, the federal, the state governments, and then there are these concurrent lists. And you look at the history, it's a federal arrangement which was brought to bring in a disparate kind of politics together, just like in the United States. Those things worked in those countries where they didn't have any other option. The United States was annexing states from Mexico and from the native peoples. It was absolute slaughter and bloodshed. But they are moving towards centralization, right? And they are telling us now devolve. And we are supposed to be in a global village, mind you. Boundaries don't matter. But in Sri Lanka, you must cut it. You must cut it. So I don't see, when it's easy as a slogan for someone to say, you don't have your devolution, you didn't do your 13th Amendment, there's no reconciliation, it's not possible. That is a whine as far as I am concerned. Maybe the architects of the new constitution should revisit these processes, look at the history, look at other countries that have had these kinds of issues, how they resolve them. And India's position in Geneva was, we are for devolution, but we support the territorial integrity, but it's for a united Sri Lanka. Unity cannot be scripted into a constitution. Why don't they say unitary? Right? That's sleight of hand. That is just playing ball with our constitution and our future and our people. And I vehemently oppose that kind of process. Be clear about it. Why are you using these terms which have no meaning? Because you can be united in a confederation, you can be united in a federal state, you can be united in a state where there are no provinces. Right? Unity is something else. You can have a country with 100,000 people like Grenada, and that can be united, but you can also cut it and say it's united.
Malinda, of course, we will continue this discussion after we cross over to this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
SLFP to restructure while supporting the government, says former President Maithripala Sirisena while calling upon the Mahasangha. 55,000 litres of substandard coconut oil discovered in Dankotua. How did the consignments that were under the custody of Sri Lanka Customs get to Dankotua? The opposition questions. Traffic constable who assaulted a driver in Pannepitia remanded. A draft bill introduced to amend the provincial council election system. Bonus seats to be increased. China donates 600,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Sri Lanka. Chinese nationals to receive the jab in the first phase.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're in discussion with the political commentator Malinda Seneviratne. We of course allocate a certain amount of time on this show for questions that have been sent in by our viewers, and there is a question that has come in. If the proper procedures were followed in the release of the container terminals, I believe the reference is to the coconut oil containers, would they have entered the market? Now, of course, a disclaimer, the minister has said that this has not entered the market. The Director General of the Customs, however, said that as per the agreement that they have with these companies on releasing the stocks to their storages, it should not have been released to the market, but investigations are underway to check as to if any of it has been released to the market.
I think, Sharlan, now this is just one example, but infringements of regulations is not new. They happen. Even in there are no perfect system, there are loopholes, there are all kinds of things that can happen, but the strength of a system is not necessarily about making sure that there's nothing that
nothing bad happens.
Yeah, but the moment something bad happens, the quick response, that is a very important thing. Like someone gets...
And of course the message that you send out to the rest of the people involved in whatever trade, industry, on the consequences of infringing on those regulations is important.
Exactly. So you have guidelines, you have laws, you have regulations, then there are people who somehow manage to creep through, right?
A simple example for this, Malinda, would I be wrong if I said hotels that violate health regulations, health codes, be it provincial or...
That is why you do random checks.
Exactly.
Right, like if you have censorship, you can't, the censor board or the public performances board, they can't look at all the teledramas, all the, before, but they can set guidelines, and if someone complains about some material, some content that is aired, say it's not suitable for children, then you check that particular episode and then you say, okay, this is off. So then the producer, the director and the station will be more mindful about what they allow and what they, right? So like that, there are systems in place. When there is an infringement, where there is a violation, sometimes maybe this is one thing that came to light, then there are lots of things that don't come to light. That, like one example is the police. Deaths in custody, some police officer beating someone up, right? That is wrong, but we can't, you can't, such things do happen, but how do you respond
to it?
Because if you respond quickly, effectively, take action, then that sends the right message to people who might
in the future,
who are in a
possible violations, as you call it.
Possible violation. So then that is how systems work. So in this case also, we have had a history of in the name of development and the markets, cutting down all the coconut trees, ruining the. Then there's another thing. Coconut is bad. It's bad cholesterol and so all kinds of nonsense, and then. You have to import coconut and you get these kinds of situations. Now people don't talk about the other part of how we started importing coconut in the first place, right? There's an issue there also. So we should not look at the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of ice beneath the surface which we cannot ignore. That's history.
But as far as following the proper procedures goes, do you believe that there has been an expeditious response to this in this instance?
Well, from what you said, I have not been following it as closely as you seem to have, But what you said was that there is an investigation. They have called for an investigation, but we also live in a country where there are lots of commissions and inquiries and investigations, and sometimes delays in such processes don't do much good. I mean, we want to know, have answers. Of course, they have to run their course, but then if it's a situation where the next crisis makes people forget about this, that's what is profitable to those who do wrong, and that is our responsibility as citizens, as media people. You let the next big black thing that comes out, and you focus on that, and send the rest of it under the carpet, and it goes out of the radar. That's not a good thing. That is our responsibility. You keep your eye on the ball.
Malinda, we've just got a few minutes left on the show, and I'd like to focus your attention on one of the political milestones, or the turning points that caused the change of government from the Yahapalne government to this government. One cannot forget that there were two main incidents, among others of course, that really caused the Yahapalne government to fall on its face. One was the central bank bond scam, and that happened directly after the government came into power.
You're like Faraz Shaukat Ali now. Okay, you have to come to this, the Makkah's story. But
then that was not what I was going to speak to you about, Malinda. The first one was the central bank bond scam, of course, and that continues to remain unsolved. We see suspects being taken into custody, suspects being released on bail, but of course that's a different matter entirely, because that is a matter before courts, and courts will decide. The second issue, however, is still not a matter that has been charged in courts. It's the Easter Sunday attacks. And this Sunday is Easter Sunday. It's not the 21st of April, but it does coincide with at least the celebration that fell on the 21st of April. I myself remember going to church and then hearing about these explosions, and then just in Sinhala you say, "Ange le vathura." So I remember the feeling, and 2 years down the line, just imagine the feeling in the hearts of the victims of this attack, who have to watch these matters being politicized over and over again on social media, on the news.
It is very disconcerting.
It's still no justice. I mean, politicization of these issues is inevitable. It's expected. But at least there needs to be some justice for these people.
Some conclusion.
Some conclusion to
finality.
2 years down the line.
It is very disconcerting. At the same time, you can't hurry the law. There are processes that have to, you can't just, I want a solution now, my anxiety.
But in the 2 years?
Exactly, 2 years is a long time. We've had 500 years of colonialism. We've had our land plundered, and there's no resolution on that. No repatriation on that. They are not talking about returning the loot. They are not talking of compensation.
You're continuing to start sounding like a politician, because just because that happened back then.
That is not a.
That's not an excuse.
No, obviously not. I'm trying to give you context. We have a system of governance, world political economic order, where certain countries profit at the expense of other countries, right? Guns in, booty out. That has not changed. We have had the Bretton Woods institutions which have been set up, which operate to facilitate that plunder. We talk about cartels. How many people own the largest amount of the world's wealth? Who? They can be named. They can be named. Right? It's so small, right? Where are they resident? What is the color of their face, right? So those issues will never get resolved. We can say that this issue is a relatively manageable issue, and I think that 2 years is a time long enough to sort that out. We've had the whole issue of what was it? FG, the Silinko issue, the
golden key.
The golden key.
Right.
Those people, some people committed suicide. We've had the 1980 strikers. How many committed suicide? Some of them are died now. We need not have to wait this long for justice. We need to know, right? We need to know all the victims. I mean, they are dead and gone. Their families needed to compensate. Some of them have been compensated. But the truth of this, who did this, how, and what were the circumstances which facilitated this, and who were responsible for negligence, for the negligence that allowed this. Those things, those questions need to be answered, and answered fast. You don't have to wait 500 years for that, and I hope that happens. I don't know whether it can happen before Easter Sunday, but let's say before Vesak. Why not?
We're very optimistic. Of course, it's not for lack of trying or the lack of investigations. There have been investigations conducted by a parliamentary select committee. President Maithripala Sirisena appointed a separate committee. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe at the time, former
and
Prime
then
Minister,
the general course of the law
appointed a separate committee. There were investigations conducted by the CID, the TID. There was a Presidential Commission of Inquiry appointed into
and the Attorney General's Department has also been
supporting them. There were various other investigations, but however, despite the process taking this long, people are still waiting for a solution. And we hope, of course, that these people will see a finality to these issues so that they can
all of us.
No,
yeah.
Exactly, so that we will also be ensured of the security here in Sri Lanka, and the people who really suffered from this attack will at least see a conclusion to this matter before Easter Sunday, at least this year, or as you said, Vesak this year. Thank you very much for tuning in. That's all the time we've got on Newsline Live for tonight. Thank you very much, Malinda, for joining us on our show as usual. Thank you very much for all our viewers out there for tuning in. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Whatever.